Since Shonen Jump is on break this week, it's almost Christmas Eve, and the Jujutsu Kaisen Zero movie is out, I think, now in Japan. I figured today would be a great opportunity to finally talk about Jujutsu Kaisen Volume Zero. Today, I'm going to be talking about some of the interesting differences between Volume Zero and the main series, kind of how it connects into it, what it does for some of the characters who have very prominent roles in it, and, just some of the things I find kind of interesting about it. But before I get into that, I of course have to mention we are only 27 subscribers away from hitting our subscriber goal for 2021, 4,000 by the end of the year. There's a little bit over a week left, so I think if every person watching this who hasn't already hit that subscribe button, we would hit our goal in no time. So with that out of the way, let's get on with the video. Volume 0 is an interesting chunk of the series to sort of go over because it's where the series got its start. Today, for most of us, it's a prequel or it's a part that you read first or read after Hidden Inventory. But for a while, Volume 0 was Jujutsu Kaisen. Before the series actually, got serialized, it was a 4-part one-shot in Shonen Jump called something like, Tokyo Metropolitan Curse Technical School. Yeah, so you kind of set the foundations for how the Jujutsu world worked, introduced the characters who we now know as Gojo, and who are currently the second-year students. Though, of course, in Volume 0, they were the first-year students. They were the protagonists, where now they're supporting characters for the most part. Seems like Yuta's kind of a member of the main cast again, so that's kind of neat. There are some differences between Volume 0 and the mainline series, mostly due to the fact that, the whole thing hadn't really been fleshed out yet, because Gege didn't know he was going to be making an entire series. I think in Volume 0 they say there are only 16 special grade curses, which is strange because then in the main series they're just a categorization that we see plenty of. And I don't think Gojo is, explicitly top of the verse. In the main series, we know that basically the entire universe revolves around Gojo because he's the most powerful person in the world by a lot. Whereas in Volume 0, it seemed like that hadn't been really established as of yet. So instead, he's just a really strong guy. So that's just kind of neat. But the main focus of Volume 0 is on telling the story of Yuta Okkotsu, of course, who we all now know as the special grade sorcerer who's a part of the second-year students at Tokyo Jujutsu Technical School, who went a really long-ass time without being in the main story, presumably because, you kind of have to let the current main character establish himself before the really overpowered original main character can come back. But Yuta's very interesting as a main character because he's kind of like an inverse of Yuji. For starters, their names are similar. They both start with Y and U and are only 4 letters. And end with vowels. Curious. But other than that, both of them are attached to a very powerful curse. However, there are some very interesting differences, such as that Rika actually tries to help out Yuta, and sometimes goes a little overboard in doing that, whereas Sukuna actively tries to screw over Yuji and wants to ruin his life, but sometimes Sukuna ends up being kind of helpful. Rika's power primarily comes from Yuta. Her being a curse is something of his own creation, although accidentally, whereas most of Yuji's power comes from Sukuna, from him consuming Sukuna's finger, which was something he did intentionally. And, of course, Yuta's story arc is mostly around him learning to connect with people and stop isolating himself because of his fear of Rika and what she would do to people. Whereas a lot of what happened to Yuji up through the Shibuya incident and the immediate aftermath was him being connected to people and then ever so slowly getting away from them, trying to stay away from them because of Sukuna and the threat that he posed to all the people around him. So it's very interesting how Yuta is kind of the blueprint for Yuji as a protagonist. But when it came to doing the main series, it seemed like Gege decided to kind of take the concept of Yuta and sort of flip some of the major aspects of his character on their head. Basically do a reflection, an opposite side of the coin for Yuta's character. As already mentioned, the characters who are currently part of the second year class are, in Volume 0, part of the first year class, and as we know, the first years are always the main characters. So this is where we get a lot of the information on Maki and Inumaki, and really not so much Panda, actually. Panda is the least developed of the first year students in Volume 0. Funny how that worked out, because now Inumaki kind of got most of his development in Volume 0 in that one chapter where he's working with Yuta. And then after Goodwill event, he's been kind of like non-existent. He shows up for a little bit in Shibuya, and then it's been like a year since we heard that he lost his arm, whereas Panda was pretty irrelevant in Volume 0, but then we learned a lot more about him during the Goodwill event, and then he was kind of just present in the Shibuya incident, but now he's actually become kind of important in the Culling game, and he's actually, traveling around with the main characters now, so funny how that worked out. But Maki is the one who has kind of consistently been really important. We learned kind of the gist of her character. The foundations for her character are in Volume 0. It's where we learn about how she doesn't have any cursed energy, she just has physical power. That led to her being looked down upon and mistreated by the Zenin clan. She wanted to become a grade 1 sorcerer to kind of tell them to go fuck themselves, and then eventually take over the clan. Now, I don't think Mai existed yet at this point in the story. It doesn't seem like it. So at this point, it's basically just Maki being like, those guys were assholes to me, I want to show them what's up. As opposed to that, but also I want to make the Zenin clan a place where my sister can actually have a normal life. So it's much more of a personal thing than a selfless thing for Mai. And she's the one where we actually get kind of the most development on her relationship with Yuta. They're the ones that are working together in the first chapter. They actually have fairly important personal interactions in the third chapter of Volume 0. And, they're the ones that we see meet up again in the main series after the Shibuya incident, so who knows what's going on there? I don't know, we'll see. So, yeah, this is very important for establishing mostly Maki's character, to be totally honest, and then giving us sort of the very small amounts of information we actually have about Inumaki's character, because he's almost a non-character at this point, to be totally honest. Gojo's kind of an interesting case, because he's still Gojo. I mean, Gojo's the same guy in Volume 0 that he pretty much is in the rest of the series. We even kind of meet him in the same way, with the main character being in a room full of cursed seals, and Gojo kind of telling them what's up, and essentially rescuing them. And, he's still the same teacher-mentor character that he is for Yuji, here for Yuta. But once again, the difference here seems to be that the world does not revolve around Gojo, and that's likely because this was going to be a smaller series. This was only going to be a one-shot. The focus was going to be on Yuta and the other second years. So Gojo was much more of a supporting character than he is in the main series, where, frankly, he's almost like a main character. He's pretty much the +1 to the main trio in the rest of the series. So he is much more of a supporting character here. We also get the establishment of Gojo and Ghetto's relationship, their friendship, when they were both still students. And of course, Ghetto is the main villain of Volume 0. And I would actually say he's probably one of the characters that benefited the most from Jujutsu Kaisen becoming an entire series, because he's kind of one-dimensional. in Volume 0, for the most part, up until his death, when we actually start to get some more insight into his character, learn about his relationship with Gojo. Before then, he's just kind of a crazy asshole. Just kind of a crazy genocidal asshole who wants to create a world with only sorcerers. And we don't really find out the exact reasonings for that until we get to Hidden Inventory, which serves to really flesh out both Ghetto and Gojo. It's my personal recommendation that people who have not read Volume 0 read it after Hidden Inventory, because you don't know what happens to Ghetto at the end of Volume 0, and then you get their backstory together before you find out what eventually happens to Ghetto. It's generally nicer to read something before you find out what someone's ultimate fate is. That's just my personal idea for how to do the reading order. I actually read Volume 0 like right after I started reading Jujutsu Kaisen for the first time, because someone told me I had to read it or I wouldn't understand a bunch of things. Not really true, but then I knew who the second years were, so I thought that was kind of neat. But if I were to read through blind again, I would want to read Volume 0 after finishing up Hidden Inventory. And also because they're both in the past, so I guess Volume 0 kind of turns Hidden Inventory into an even more extended flashback, I guess. But, you know, that's just kind of a neat detail, and that's kind of the way that I would attach Volume 0 to the rest of the series, because it is kind of its own thing. You can always read through in chronological order. You can start with Volume 0 and then read the rest of the series, but I think the best way to include it as something that is part of the whole, instead of like a prologue, that's probably the best point to, sit down and read it. But yeah, with that, that's about all I have to say about Volume 0. It's a pretty solid arc. Not one of my favorites, though I know some people for whom it is one of their favorites. It introduces, well, really the whole series, honestly. It is where everything began, so it is kind of important in the grand scheme of things. I guess I look forward to eventually watching the Volume 0 movie whenever I get a chance to. I have no idea what will come first, watching it on the internet or actually seeing it in theaters. But what do you guys think about Volume 0? Be sure to let me know down in the comments below. And with that, that's all for today's video. If you enjoyed, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click that notification bell so you don't miss any of my uploads. I do Jujutsu Kaisen chapter reactions and reviews. Every week we get a new chapter. If you enjoy discussing Jujutsu Kaisen with other people, or you just enjoy the content I produce in this channel, I highly suggest you check out my Discord server. I have linked to that down in the description. And since it's the end of the video, it's time to give a shout out to my wonderful patrons. Special thanks to Neo, Dijon Redden, Anthony Chavez, Honey Mustard, K-God, Chris Redfield, Scratch23, Rat, Ryzen 4K, Artist, Mac Campaign, Wave of Manga, Chuck's Feed and Seed, Jakester Easy, Playfree Labs, and Emerald. Thank you all very much for supporting me on Patreon. I greatly appreciate it, and if you too want to get a shout out at some point during videos, or access to reviews for solo leveling and the Boxer, you can always become a patron as well. There's a link to my Patreon down in the description. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys around. Take care. Oh, and Merry Christmas.